Stories, facts, and even the myths surrounding spies and their escapades have been indelibly influenced by their depictions in the fictional realm. While few may believe that Ian Fleming's Bond provides a realistic portrayal of espionage in the modern world, the character's oversaturation in the mainstream, via primarily Hollywood-financed films, has ensured that broadly reductive and fanciful images come to mind when the word spy is uttered in the West. But even James Bond has tried to catch up with the post-9/11 climate, as reflected in the grittier and more overtly violent nature of the latest films which feature Daniel Craig in the titular role. Of course, such amiable portrayals of a secretive and mysterious career field begs the question, how much of the unknown is up to public speculation and imagination? This example is contrasted powerfully by the writings of John le Carré. Though le Carré's most famous literary spy character, George Smiley, hasn't reached the level of fame and renown as Fleming's Bond, what is lacking in fame is made up for in philosophy. Le Carré, having served as a literal agent on Her Majesty's Secret Service, had a much different, darker, and holistic worldview as it related to espionage than Fleming. No doubt his more realistic writing helped pave the way for the next generation of authors, like Chang Rae-Lee, who would take up the subject matter. But it should be noted that despite its proliferation in the last century or so, the spy genre is a relatively unstable creature, having only been brought about by the dramatic rise in the reality of espionage due to the globalization of the 20th century and a myriad of international scheming and warring. The genre is more directly tied to what is reflected in reality than perhaps most other genres. Some critics, noting this, have prematurely pronounced the genre dead. The whole genre is in trouble, wrote Walter Lacour in an issue of Commentary. He saw the end of the Cold War as the final nail in the coffin of a genre he considered a trend. But others weren't so quick to make such a dramatic statement. Tomorrow's spy novels, Grove Kroger said in an article that examined and critiqued a plethora of texts from the genre, quote, will deal with the machinations of the international cartels.
Secrets, private sector, real full-blown corporate espionage.
Certainly Kroger might have had le Carré's texts in mind when he made the statement, but he also did well to predict the exact kind of novel Chang Rae-Lee would write a mere 2 years later. Native Speaker, Lee's first novel, dealt with some of the fallout from an increasingly complex and globalized world, as reflected in the life of an industrial spy.
Hell, I'd shown her everything else. She wanted to learn.
Lee subverted many of the tropes and conventions of the genre. It wasn't so much a reinvention of the field as it was an effort to be human-centric and psychologically focused. In the same way that le Carré dared to suggest that a spy might have mores of his own that contradicted with his country's, Lee anticipates the post-9/11, quote, anxieties about the end of American hegemony that Anne Kensington and Jen Fallonshy both discussed in their article, Paranoia in Post-9/11 American Fiction.
Give it back. Tell whoever sent you it wasn't there, and I won't say anything.
It's Lee's suggestion that being American is much more than possessing citizenship that undergirds so much of the novel and drives it to a new place within the genre. Indeed, Lee's novel seems self-aware of its precarious place within and outside of the text itself. For one, Lee's protagonist is a spy without direct governmental oversight. With no three-letter agency to report to or interact with, and a bland and vague replacement populated by people who are anything but, there is a different kind of intrigue at work that pays little attention to the machinations and intentions of larger overseers and focuses on the individual, in this case, the protagonist. But this isn't the only convention breaking within the novel.
Step away from the window.
Even if you were more persuasive, I wouldn't.
For Lee has created a character in Henry Park who is also a family man.
Step away.
Of course, he is adrift for much of the novel, wallowing in grief over the death of his son, and coming to terms with the reality that living with his wife and working in his profession are not compatible if he desires to remain wedded. Perhaps most interesting is Lee's choice to make Henry a foreigner. As one who indirectly enables the great spying superpower America, it is meaningful that Henry is not American by birth. Just as Lee takes much time to develop and state the case for immigrants of certain nationalities being forced into menial jobs and lives upon their arrival, a fate many do not escape despite their talents and abilities, so does Henry's nationality and place of birth bring a form of accusation upon the United States. In the same way that immigrants are tolerated at the lower class and confined there to support the larger economic and societal construction of America, so is Henry Park's work as an industrial spy, rather than a government agent, indicative of a nation that desperately needs immigrants to do its dirty work, sometimes quite literally.
Don't go home, though. At least I wouldn't. Miller may not wait till Monday to collect.
By the novel's end, Henry leaves his career as a spy in favor of rebuilding the relationship with his wife. This is very reminiscent of Le Carré's The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. And while Le Carré's character made the decision to give up his literal life for love and humanity, rather than be beholden to his nation's political aims, Henry Park's refusal to work any longer as an agent is also a statement of individualism against his country. Though several shades more subtle, Lee's novel ends on a note that suggests that personal liberty and morality trump all shades of gray that a life of espionage forces one to endure. Thus, it seems likely that the spy genre will continue to endure based on the writer's ability to adapt to the modern world, rather than the mutable political aims and climates of nation-states. Native Speaker, though a work of fiction, makes the argument that the world of espionage is even more cutthroat and confusing than anything James Bond was ever dealt.